In Unit 4, we're going to look at two different discipline styles, the obedience model versus the responsibility model. Before we begin to look at the different discipline models, let's quickly clarify what obedience and responsibility refers to in this course. Obedience involves following rules or procedures without question, regardless of belief, ideas, or right or wrong, instincts, and experiences or values. This is where we blindly following instructions. So let's take a look at an example. A university lecturer does this experiment with her learners. She walks into a lecture with a toy gun and tells the class that she can shoot and kill anyone at any moment. Then she points the gun at one of the students and calls them by name and tells them to stand up or I'll shoot you. And the student obeys, even though they know the lecturer is not going to shoot them. Next, she instructs that student to come to the front of the class. And the learner obeys and does what they are told. Then she tells them to lie down on the floor. Again, the learner follows the instructions and obeys the lecturer and lies down on the floor. Next, the lecturer says, "Take off your clothes." And immediately the learner says, "No, I won't do that." And it is at this point that the lecturer then waits a moment and explains to the class that the refusal to take off their clothes is what has robbed her of her power. That her power rested in the student's willingness to obey and not the fact that she had a gun. So if we go back to it, obedience is following rules or procedures or instructions without question, regardless of their beliefs, ideas of right or wrong, instincts and experiences or values. And the power comes in that the student obeyed every command that the lecturer gave. So that is obedience. So let's look at what is responsibility. Now this involves acting mindfully with the knowledge and acceptance of the consequences of one's actions. So what does this exactly mean? Well, in a nutshell, responsible refers to the understanding of your consequences of your actions and making a decision based on that knowledge. Let's quickly take a look at an example. A young boy wants to go and fly his kite, his brand new kite, but it is a very windy day. And he unfortunately couldn't control the kite and it fell to the ground and broke. Now there are two scenarios that could have played out. Firstly, the boy who was very excited didn't consider the wind and take it into consideration. That means that he was careless and he made a mistake. The other option is that the boy knew that it was very windy and he knew there was a chance that he could lose control of the kite and it would break, but he still decided to go and fly the kite anyways. Therefore, he accepted that the kite might break and he made the decision with all that in mind. This boy, if he chose the second scenario, is demonstrating responsibility. And making a responsible decision doesn't mean you make the right or the correct decision. It means that you make a mindful one, that you are aware of the consequences before you do an action. Managing the behavior of learners is a very complex task. The main goal of obedience is to keep learners in line, to keep them doing what you tell them to do, and this is done through punishments. The main goal of the responsibility model is to teach learners responsible choices. And this model gets the desired behavior from the learners through helping them see that they cause their own outcomes. Teaching learners to make responsible decisions is a life skill that all learners need to acquire, practice, and perfect. Yet the most common form of discipline found in the classroom is obedience. And there's a very simple explanation for this. Obedience is easier. Telling learners what to do requires the least amount of effort or change from the teacher and the learner. A list of classroom rules and punishments are put in place, and every time a rule is broken, there's a subsequent punishment. While teaching responsibility, on the other hand, requires more time and effort on the teacher's part. It is a slow and cumbersome process, as it involves a process of learning, of guiding and assisting learners to make responsible, thought-out decisions. Now let's look at who is in control. In the obedience model and in the responsibility, where does the control or the power lie? So learners who are drilled to obey their teachers have an external locus of control. So they believe that what happens to them is out of their control. Learners who are taught to make responsible decisions believe that they have control over the consequences that they receive. So let's bring it back to the classroom. How do the two models get learners to behave in an appropriate and respectful way? The obedience model uses punishments to threaten and scare learners, and they believe it is what we as the teachers do to the learners that gets the desired behavior. While the responsibility model helps learners to see that what is done by the learners is a consequence of their own behavior. The obedience model offers teachers a short-term solution to a constant flow of misbehavior. Through threats and punishments, learners will react and you will get the desired behavior for a while. But when those rules and punishments become inconsistent and the learners begin to act up again, then you're stuck with the problem. So, although it is easier in the moment, it is also something that needs to be carried out consistently throughout the whole year. While the responsibility model promotes a more long-term solution to the misbehavior, defiance, and disruption. Although it takes time and effort initially to teach learners to make responsible decisions, once they have grasped the concept, they will take control of their own behavior. So let's take a look at an example. Now, before we go into it, punishments fall under the obedience model and a consequence or a logical consequence falls under the responsibility model. So Jake is running around the class when he bumps into Carla, who is packing the class stationery away. Carla falls over and all the stationery she is gathering falls out and onto the floor. Now, let's look at how different teachers would react. A teacher using the obedience model would naturally want to punish Jake. So she's more likely to scold and embarrass the learner. So a typical response could be, Jake, you never listen. You know the class rules, now look what you've done. Go and sit in the corner and wait for the bell to ring. While a teacher following the responsibility model would use a logical consequence. She would acknowledge Carla's feelings and then talk to Jake privately, and it could go something like this. Jake, can you tell me what happened? Nathan was chasing me, so I was trying to get away from him, and I accidentally bumped into Carla. Okay, so it was an accident. I did notice that you did take Nathan's shoes from him. Could that be why he was chasing you? Yes, maybe. Often when we are running in class, we are not concentrating, and then accidents happen. That's why one of our classroom rules is safety first. How do you think you could help Carla now? I don't know. I could maybe help her pick up and pack away the stationery. Great idea, Jake. Now, we can easily see that it is much easier to implement the obedience model as it is quick and allows the teacher to continue what she was doing. The responsibility model requires more effort and time from the teacher. But let's look at how the two different approaches affect the learner. In our scenario with Jake, how would he have responded to the two different styles? After receiving his punishment, he might think, the teacher didn't even see what happened. I tried to tell her that Nathan was chasing me, but she wouldn't even listen. She never listens. She always picks on me. Carla cries for everything. I hate this school. As you can see, Jake's response is very negative. Alternatively, Jake could be thinking, when I knock things over, I need to help pick them up again. It was just an accident, and I know how to fix it. My teacher helped me to solve the problem. I must remember to tell the teacher if Nathan is chasing me, and I must walk in class. This is a much more positive attitude. Now, we will look in more depth at logical consequences in the following unit. So let's look a little closely at how the different models affect the learners. The most important element to consider when deciding on a discipline style is to look at how the learners will be affected. Although some styles are easier and quicker to implement, they can be quite detrimental to the learner itself. In the obedience model, the teacher has all the control and makes all the decisions. So therefore there's a lack of accountability in the learners. They are never taught to be responsible, or they all seem to think it is not my responsibility. They are unable to think critically for themselves. Learners behave in certain ways because it is the rule, without getting the understanding or the insight as to why the rule actually exists. And often learners who are subjected to the obedience model either withdraw from class as they fear doing anything wrong. They can easily become discouraged and develop feelings of resentment. Often learners subjected to punishment adapt a very evasive and deceptive manner. They learn to find inventive ways of not getting caught. Some even become aggressive and enter into a power struggle with the teacher. So let's look at the responsibility model and how this affects the learner. The responsibility model nurtures children to become critical thinkers and problem solvers, which, let's be honest, are essential life skills for learners to have for the rest of their life. They understand that they cause their own outcomes, and they look more closely at their behavior and consider the results of their choices. This model helps learners feel that they have some control as to what happens to them and helps them to learn from their mistakes. So let's quickly look back and summarize the two different discipline approaches. So for obedience, the aim is to get your learners to do what you tell them to do. For responsibility, you want to teach learners to make responsible decisions. The method used in obedience is punishments and scare tactics and threats, anything to keep learners in line saying yes ma'am, yes sir. While logical consequences are used to help teach learners responsible choices in the responsibility model. The impact for the teacher in the obedience model is that it provides temporary relief from chaos, disruptions, and poor behavior. And sometimes in the heat of the moment, it is a quick fix. While in the responsibility model, you get a more long-term solution. So instead of having to constantly reprimand or get learners to obey to your discipline rules, in the responsibility model, learners learn to make the appropriate choices themselves. But more importantly, the impact for the obedience model is you are grooming an immature child who doesn't take accountability for their actions. They have poor problem-solving skills and poor critical thinking skills. They can't look at a situation, look at their different options, and critically decide which one is better for them. They can become withdrawn or aggressive, and lots of the times you're just producing little robots to say yes ma'am and no ma'am without questioning or thinking for themselves. In the responsibility model, you are grooming a more well-rounded, mature and accountable learner. It improves their problem-solving skills and as well as their critical thinking skills. So, before we end this unit, I want to remind you that the word discipline originates from the Latin word disciplina, which means teaching, learning, and growing. Too often we forget that discipline really means to teach, not to punish.